Good morning, everybody. If any of you, is the phone working? Okay, all right, good. If any of you have cell phones, would you please turn them off? I'm amazed that I actually remembered to turn mine off. Anyway, my name is Jim Bray. I'm the chair of the Environmental Commission in Lower Makefield Township. Firstly, I want to greet everybody in the audience this morning. When we have lectures like this, we're not sure if we're going to get 5 people or 80. But this topic, AI and the grid, I wasn't sure. But then lately, I've been reading, every time I look at the paper or the television, it seems that this is what they're talking about. But before we get into that, I just want to talk to you very briefly about the EAC in Lower Makefield Township. I don't know how long it's been here, probably 30 or 40 years, but I talk about the modern period of the EAC, which goes back about 20 years. At that time, the EAC was what I call a reactive group. And they did good work. The township periodically would give them some tasks to do, and they did them admirably. However, it's always been my feeling that the true role of a commission like this is proactive. So what does that mean? That means that let's look in the domain throughout the United States and even abroad and find out what people are doing from an environmental viewpoint that makes a lot of sense. So we actually started doing that. And between 2006 and 2009, what I call the golden period, it was just one of those perfect storm type areas where we had an incredibly receptive board of supervisors. And we also had some very, very talented people on the EAC. And that has actually gone through to today, because even today we have some really, really first-rate people. But in 3 years, what we actually did is we created a low-impact development stormwater management ordinance that was cutting edge at the time, that's still in use in Lower Makefield Township. We also created a native plant ordinance, one of the very, very first in the United States of America. And what's interesting about that, developers actually have to, in buffers, plant native vegetation. Since the time the native plant ordinance has been in effect, over 10,000 trees and plants have been planted in Lower Makefield Township that never would have been planted. So we're very, very proud of that ordinance. We also had a green building code and another 8 or 9 cutting-edge ordinances over the last 20 years that have been promulgated by the EAC. So that's a little of our history. We've also won numerous awards over that time from the United States Environmental Protection Agency, the Governor's Award for Environmental Excellence, the Sierra Club, et cetera, et cetera. But today we're here to hear a lecture on AI and the grid. For the last 20 years, the Lower Makefield Township has supported and run a lecture series and a presentation series on various topical interests, most of them serious. But this Valentine's Day, we had one that was not as serious, but was a lot of fun. It was called Naughty by Nature, and it had to do with the sexual antics of animals, of various animals in the animal kingdom. And we thought that was very appropriate for Valentine's Day. So anyway, I mean, you have to lighten up things once in a while as well. So anyway, over the last 20 years, we've been giving these various lectures. And now with Birdtown as part of the EAC for about 2 or 3 years ago, we're giving about 8 or 10 various lectures and presentations a year. So please look for others, okay? We have one coming up May 2nd on fast fashion, a whole new concept that Eleanor Turner is going to be talking about in early May. But today we're going to be talking about AI and the grid. And I'm not going to steal Eleanor's thunder. Eleanor is the one who thought that this would be of topical interest. So now, Eleanor, the podium is all yours. Thank you.
Hi, good morning. Thanks, Jim. And thanks, everybody, for being here today. Before I introduce our speakers, I just wanted to give you some context for this lecture series. So I grew up in Virginia. And if you didn't know, Virginia has like the most data centers of any state. You've probably heard of Data Center Alley. And so I started hearing about the impacts of these from family and friends and loved ones, and it was really eye-opening for me. And so while I use technology, like most of the people in this room, maybe I'm slightly more attuned to my search queries. I think understanding the full scope of AI, its demands on the infrastructure, the environmental impacts, and the impacts to our wallets is so incredibly important. I don't know about you guys, but our energy bill has doubled this winter. And though it was very cold, there's just a lot of increasing demands on the grid now. So when I heard that we were going to have a data center in Falls Township, I thought we should definitely be learning more about this. And the EAC supported me in bringing this to the lecture series. So I'm really excited to introduce our speakers today, Jessica O'Neill from Penn Future and Max Hayworth from Community Action Works. Jessica is the managing attorney for litigation at Penn Future. Since 1998, Penn Future has combined legislative advocacy and legal enforcement at the local, state, and federal levels, educational outreach, and civic engagement support for environmental outcomes that improve the quality of life for all Pennsylvanians. Max Hayworth is a community organizer for Community Action Works. And Community Action Works helps communities assess challenges, create plans, and build the people power needed to advocate for citizens. So, without further ado, I'm going to let Jessica take the stage.
Hi, everyone. So nice to see you all. As Eleanor said, my name is Jessica O'Neill. I'm an attorney at Penn Future. If there's anyone out in the audience, and I know Jim already said, who has become a member of Penn Future, thank you so much for your interest in our organization. I didn't think 5 years ago that I would ever be talking to a room about data centers. I don't think I'd ever put the words data and center together in a sentence before. Obviously, this is a really hot topic, and there's a lot of subtopics within the idea of AI and data centers in the grid. So I'm going to go through a presentation that talks about some of the aspects here. We're definitely going to have time for questions at the end. Max and I are going to stick around. So if you want to talk about something in particular, particularly in connection with the data center that's being built over in Fall Township, let me know, and we will make sure to try to talk. Also, if there are questions that I don't know the answer to, because I definitely don't know everything, or even most of everything about this topic, I'll try to work with my folks back at Penn Future to get answers after the presentation. So just want to reassure that these slides are not the be-all and end-all of this conversation. So what is a data center? We say these words a lot, but what really is it? It's a big building that houses a bunch of computer stuff. And not just like computer stuff like you have had in your basement since the mid-90s, right? Huge computing infrastructure that houses the IT systems required to store digital data and perform computing tasks. And we're talking about much more vast computing tasks than what your home computer does. This is maybe the model that you have seen in your basement, or that your kids or grandkids had, where there was, an individual using a computer and storing all kinds of stuff on what I call external media, the CD drive, the floppy disk drives. Maybe you can picture taking your kids back in the 80s or 90s to, Computer City or whatever to purchase these items, and having all of this stuff in your house, right? All of these external ways to store data, to store games, to store movies, stuff like that. I cannot confirm or deny that I looked this cool during that era. Now, that's not what we do. We put our stuff, our personal stuff, our work stuff, our media, our entertainment that we consume in a place that sometimes we like to call the cloud. And we've been calling it the cloud for a while without really ever talking about what that is. But what that means is information stored off-site somewhere else, and it's stored in a server somewhere else. But we don't really, and we have been able to do this as individuals and as individual companies or individual organizations for a while, right? When you store things in your Gmail or in your Google Drive or in your Google Photos, they're living not necessarily just on your device, on your phone or on your home computer, but in the cloud, in this collection of servers. Now, we have increased uses, increased requirements for that sort of saving these things, utilizing these things, streaming these things back and forth off-site. ChatGPT is a term you might have learned. That's an AI interface that does sort of off-site work. You ask it a question, it answers your question, and the computing power required to create the answer to that question is coming from off-site. Netflix, if you have a Netflix subscription, those movies, those TV shows, all that stuff is housed off-site somewhere else and is coming to you via the internet, via a data center. Steam is another server that's used to play video games. My son has a Steam account. Google, obviously, all of the information that Google is transmitting to you, all of that activity is happening off-site. We don't really call it the cloud anymore. Where these things are coming from, where all this computer activity is happening, is in a data center. And so when we talk about a data center, that's what it's doing. It's facilitating all this computer activity that many people are doing all day long, and many companies are doing all day long, and many organizations are doing all day long. And so when we're talking about sort of increased computing power, increased use of these kind of computer data creation resources, that's really what we're talking about. That all that stuff that we do now, the Netflix, the Google, especially the ChatGPT and the use of AI or artificial intelligence, that takes a ton of computer power, and it takes a ton of these data centers to be able to house and facilitate that computer power. Why now? Why are we talking about this now? What has changed? Well, artificial intelligence takes a lot more power. We do a lot more cloud storage and cloud computing, like I was just talking about. And we have a lot more things connected to the internet. If you can turn on your oven from work to make sure that it's preheated by the time you get home, your oven's connected to the internet. And so all those sorts of uses are taking a lot more computer power. Maybe when you used to log into your work computer, you had your Outlook, and if you wanted to send someone else a document, you would email it to them, or you would print it out and hand it to them to review, and all of those things are online now. So there's just a lot more things that are connected to the internet and using these kind of resources. Of course, I work for an environmental organization. I want to think about what are the community and environmental concerns associated with this. The first biggest is, of course, power consumption. All this computer work, all this computing, all of this data use takes a ton of power, and more power than your standard, I want to do a calculation on my computer, I want to write an email. And searching something in ChatGPT or using artificial intelligence to create a picture or to plan out a trip, or all of the things that a lot of Super Bowl commercials told you should use AI for, those things take a lot of power. Data centers require water. Just like any industrial process, it requires cooling. Think about how hot your home computer gets sometimes, and how it has a fan, and sometimes if you leave your phone out in the sun, it freaks out and it doesn't want to work. These major systems require cooling, and the amount of water required for that cooling depends on what the system is. They can make a lot of noise. And a lot of municipalities, a lot of local residents have been concerned about sort of the constant hum, the constant noise coming from a data center. It's a collection of machines. There are noises associated with that. It's an industrial building. It's a warehouse. You might be concerned about how it looks in your municipality. You might be worried if it's going into a green field or in a rural area where that use maybe doesn't quite fit the historic uses of the area. And of course, like any warehouse or like any big impervious surface, any big building, we want to worry about stormwater runoff. we're paving an area for a parking lot, we're putting a roof on something that perhaps used to be permeable soil. What are the runoff implications of that? It sounds like Lower Makefield Township's already done a lot of thinking about stormwater runoff, and it's something that all communities ought to be thinking about because stormwater is dirty and carries pollutants to our waterways. We at Penn Future have a ton of resources on this, so if I went too fast through any of that and you're like, oh, I would really like to go back and learn some more about that, we have done a series of videos diving into some of these individual concerns. They're all about 10 minutes long, and I'll make sure to help folks, if you're interested, get access, get the website and get access to all of that. So I just rattled through a lot of worries. How can we address some of these concerns now? A lot of times we think about what should the federal government be doing. And there are a number of federal initiatives about AI, about data centers. A lot of these issues are not going to be addressed at the federal level. I think this is a place where Congress and the executive branch have some authority, but not a huge amount. So I wouldn't necessarily be looking to the federal government for answers here or for sort of direction as to how to move forward for your community. At the state level, we have not seen a ton of action before. We have a governor offering incentives and encouraging data centers to come in. He's got a new proposal as of the last 2 weeks that would provide some incentives based on some additional limitations, which I think is a good correction. There are a number of bills in the state legislature right now about data centers and about sort of imposing additional requirements on them before they can be allowed. We see state legislators calling for a statewide moratorium. I think we will see more action at the state level, but there's not currently really so I think we will see more action at the state level. And if you're interested in that, I would absolutely suggest looking at some of our resources and talking to your state legislators about these issues, because I think they are hearing from constituents and they want to hear from constituents, because this is an issue affecting everyone in the state. And at the local level. Obviously, you all are here as residents of this area who have questions and concerns about this, and there's actually a lot you can do about certain aspects of this at your local level. And we've done a lot of work here. Land use regulation in Pennsylvania really happens at the local level. The power to control a lot of these localized impacts is in the hands of your municipality, in the hands of your zoning board, in the hands of your supervisors to help set you up for success. And what I want to emphasize here, and some of the additional slides will talk about this, is that these are really things that we want to be thinking about before the data center proposal comes in. Because once a proposal comes in, the law that is on the books at that time is what governs. So if you're thinking, I don't know, are they going to want to build one here in this old strip mall that's been vacated and doesn't have any tenants in it anymore? You should think about your zoning and you should think about your land use regulation now, before that happens. So I just mentioned zoning. Local laws called zoning ordinances, which I'm sure many of you are very familiar with, control how individual landowners can use their property. They say what can be built where, and also include other rules like building height, setbacks, amounts of impervious cover that you can have on your property, things like that. Local governments do a lot through zoning. Sometimes when we have to get an ordinance to build our mother-in-law addition on the back of our property, we're annoyed at zoning, right? But when we want to think about what industrial uses do we want to put in our town and where, zoning is your friend. Zoning is how you set the rules up. They set the rules that everyone has to follow, including the people making the decisions about whether to approve a project. A lot of folks, I think, and I'm not suggesting that folks in this audience, but when we talk to folks around the state and when we think about sort of, oh, why are they building that? Doesn't everyone hate it? I think there's this myth that what gets built in a community depends on whether a majority of the people in that community want it or not. That is a myth. You can all hate the data center. You can all hate the warehouse. But if your zoning ordinance allows that warehouse or that data center to be built, it's going to have to get approved, because the laws that are in place when the zoning application is filed, unless there's some other major problem with it, are going to be what governs. So just because everybody that shows up at the community meeting says this is a terrible idea, if it's going to meet the rest of the requirements and it's going to match under the zoning and it's going to sort of otherwise be legal, there's really not a way for local officials necessarily to stop it. And I think that's really important because we are reactive people, right? And we don't necessarily believe that some terrible thing that we all agree is not good for our towns. We think we should have necessarily a way to stop that. And I am a lawyer. I see that sort of stuff all day long. Like, can we just sue them? Isn't there something we can do? Well, it would be a lot easier if you made the rules the way you want them, if you set your rules up in a way that protects your town before that happens. Because good rules are essential to a good outcome. So zoning ordinances, and I know it sounds like Lower Makefield Township has enacted some really positive environmental zoning ordinances, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time here because it sounds like folks are familiar with this. The governing body, like the Board of Supervisors or Commissioners, can pass zoning ordinances. Your Environmental Advisory Council here can give input and can make recommendations, can set out what it thinks a good zoning ordinance would be to recommend that to the governing body to review. You'll hear a lot of talk, and there's a bill in the legislature about a model ordinance for data centers. And a model ordinance means somebody, some hopefully smart, expert, knowing what they're talking about entity, wrote a model ordinance and said, hey, municipality, we got some ideas. Rather than start from scratch with possibly your volunteer zoning board and your volunteer governing body that's got other jobs and doesn't necessarily have the time and resources to become an expert on this, we wrote a model for you. There's a bill in the legislature right now that Penn Future is still evaluating that would require the DCED, the State Department of Community and Economic Development, to draft a model ordinance for data centers. So, there's going to be a lot more discussion about model ordinances. My colleague did this animation, so I'm very excited about it. We have a model ordinance that we have been handing out, demonstrating to municipalities around the state because we think it covers a lot of these concerns. Obviously, it's a model, right? It's not necessarily, you can modify it to fit the concerns and the specific issues for your locality. But I would recommend that the local decision makers in the audience take a look at the model ordinance because we think it can help you pre-plan for a lot of these issues before the application comes your way. It has suggested language on definitions, building height, setbacks. Setbacks is a controversial topic. Noise and vibration, this is a big one that localities certainly have the ability to regulate. Water usage, buffers, and how to set up your approval process. I think one of the challenges here for any local land use decision-making body is that a developer's had a long time to think about something, right? And they're going to come in with a fully vetted, fully thought-through proposal, and a lot of times it's really hard to evaluate that and to sort of know what kind of expertise you want to bring in, what kind of questions you want to be asking. And so we've suggested some ways to build some space into that approval process to figure out what those questions are. Okay, what about power usage? We hear a lot about power usage, and I said that my biggest concern is power usage, right? Because these things use a lot of power. Local governments are not allowed to pass laws about how much power something uses, whether they can connect to the grid, where electric lines are located, or how much electricity costs, because these things are regulated at the state level by the state PUC. The PUC has been grappling with how to deal with data centers for some time. They have been engaged in a process to set a rate, a large load tariff, so the way that they bill electricity costs for large loads like data centers. My understanding is that everybody in this area is in the PICO service territory. When PICO wants to, if and when PICO wants to raise your rates, they will have to go to the PUC and bring what's called a rate case, bring a affirmative action before the PUC saying, we want to raise residential rates, we want to raise everybody's rates, here's how we do it. And that will probably, PICO will probably do that within the next year or so as a rate case. Something that I think is really important to remember about electricity is that we are all part of a multi-state grid, right? And it's called PJM, and PJM is another acronym that I'm going to guess that many people had not heard before a couple years ago. Now it is everywhere because we are all talking about PJM and our electricity rates and how much they're changing. And one thing that I think is really important to remember about these data centers is that if a data center is built in my town or the next town over or on the other side of the state, we're all in the PJM grid, it's going to affect my rates no matter where it goes. So I can stop a data center from coming into my town, or I can advocate against a data center coming into my town because I'm worried about my rates. But if it goes in 2 towns over, my rates might still go up because the rates are not just going to be determined by what's in your immediate locality. But advocacy at the PUC level about how the Public Utility Commission at the state level treats these data centers, treats these large loads, still has a lot of power. So how can you be part of this process? And I was just previewing that a little bit there. Again, I want to direct you, if you're interested, to some of our resources. We've got a lot on various forms of social media and on our website, providing some deeper insight into some of these topics. And you're all here in this local government building because you're interested in this topic, right? And I would encourage you to continue to advocate in and to be part of your local decision-making power at public meetings, with your EAC, and in thinking about this local zoning. I know that the project in Falls Township, they did not have a data center specific ordinance when that project was proposed. It fit under their existing zoning ordinance in a sort of heavy industrial use. And so it was a permitted use in that area. So that means that the sort of ability of the local government to impose any additional conditions or to put any additional restrictions on that was really limited, because based on how the zoning was for that area that the proposal was for, it was a use by right. So they could simply put it in there. I was at a event with one of the township supervisors from that in Falls Township recently, and he sort of talked about the construction and wishing that they would have had an ordinance in place. Not that it necessarily would have changed the outcome in a big way. You know, they probably would still have this data center there, but they could have thought a little bit more about some of the impacts and how they wanted to treat it before it went in. And so I think that's really the advantage of doing that sort of pre-application thinking as a municipality. What do we want? What are important aspects for us? What are we worried about? Do we have sensitive use wetlands? Are we worried about truck traffic? Do we want the construction, but we're concerned about the noise? Things like that. So that's all I have. I am, again, happy to take questions at the end. I'm going to flip it over to Max to talk a little bit more about community participation and what you can do. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Jessica. And thank you so much for hosting us as well here for this talk about data centers. I also included our work around crypto mines, which is a different type of data center, but functions very similarly, but the function in itself is a little bit different. It's linked to things like Bitcoin, cryptocurrency, things like that, and that's something that we've been seeing when we've been working with communities. So a little bit about us. So thanks for the introduction about us. So we work directly with community members, and largely, we're not necessarily a group that runs a specific program per se, but we basically, community members come to us with environmental issues they want to work and prioritize in their community, and we work with them to provide training and support on the issues. And this issue around data centers and crypto mines have been some of the top issues these past 2 years. So this is how we end up working with communities. So we provide training and support, particularly around building campaign plans, a winning campaign message, a strategy, and just working to just help communities to be able to work with their community members within their local decision makers and make a difference. We have a couple of different resources down here, but feel free to reach out to me after the presentation of how we can help support community efforts. But I did want to just zoom back out again. Thanks, Jessica, for also providing a big context about what a data center is and what's happening. But I want to center on just the impacts and how it's presenting itself all across the country. So particularly, I wanted to zoom in on just the massive energy use and just what that means for particularly a big thing that we're trying to work on, as in the environmental community, is pushing for more clean and renewable energy and trying to get that transition. But data centers and crypto mines have been presenting a huge challenge in that regard. Data centers in particular are projected to be a major source of increased electricity demand over the next 10 years. And this is second only to the electrification of transportation. There's been a report by the EPRI, which is the Electric Power Research Institute, that predicts that data center electricity demand could grow by as little as 29% or as much as 166% from 2023 levels by 2033. And this is resulting in some troubling issues, such as delaying the retirements of at least 17 fossil fuel power plants and nuclear power plants. So we probably have seen that headline with 3 Mile Island coming back online. And this is, something that's totaling into 9,100 megawatts of capacity, actually almost 10,888, which is the equivalent of powering 900,000 homes in the Northeast. So this is, troubling and definitely slowing our progress to a clean energy system that would have less impact on our climate and also, the public health of communities. So another big issue we're seeing is crypto mines, which are data centers, but the way they function is that instead of, where we store our stuff, what Jessica was talking about before, these are actually systems that are basically creating calculations and bidding on crypto mines to get a Bitcoin. So it's using an immense amount of electricity just to get Bitcoin mines. So this is a big thing that's happening in places like Georgia and Texas. And just as a stat, and globally, Bitcoin consumed about 121.13 terawatt hours of electricity in 2023. This is more than the entire state of Michigan in itself, just that year. Other issues, so we talked about water. There's a stat where one data center can consume as much as 5 million gallons of water daily, which is the equivalent of 7.5 Olympic-sized pools. So imagine that. That's a lot of water. Noise pollution in particular has been a huge issue that community members have been bringing up, and this has been a major way that community members have been rallying around this issue. Residents near these crypto mines have reported noise levels as high as 91 decibels. This is the equivalent of a chainsaw going off right here. Just that for constant humming. And there were reports in Granbury, Texas, where citizens reported a variety of ailments as a result of this constant humming and sound, from hearing loss, migraines, vertigo, and nausea. So people are actually going to the hospital as a result of noise pollution. So this is not just like, this is an annoyance. This is actually resulting in some public health harms to community members. In terms of utility bills, Eleanor mentioned that her bill went up by double, which is insane. And a lot of the cost of these investments of new generating capacity is being passed off to taxpayers and utility customers. So we've been seeing that because of data centers are cited as a root cause of an expected 20% increase in utility prices in 2025 all across the Mid-Atlantic region. So we're seeing a big bump in particular. One other thing is, as these data centers are coming into towns, I'm sure a lot of, one of the big reasons why towns are really opening up arms to these type of things are the creation of jobs. But according to an organization called Good Jobs First, I recommend everyone checking out a report. They cite that actually very few permanent jobs are created. They're often only employing around 20 to 50 people on these sites. And a lot of the sites of job creation is often actually during the construction, so it's actually not permanent jobs. So this is something that, not necessarily benefiting the community as what is, initially purported. And then I want to zoom and just kind of center in on where data centers are starting to happen. So Virginia, Data Center Alley is the top state with 663 operational data centers, with 595 more under construction or planned. That's insane. In Texas, there are over 405 existing data centers, with 442 being planned or being built. In Georgia, Currently, there's 162 data centers and is slated for 285 more. That's an 176% increase if all are built. And then Pennsylvania is coming in next with 98 currently reported operational, with 184 more potentially on the way, which is a 188% increase. So this is something that's definitely becoming more and more relevant, and something that we need to make sure we're addressing to make sure that these data centers are we want to reduce the impact on community members in particular. So I wanted to just zoom in on just how we got into this issue and talk about a community member that I worked with. And I like to cite this person in particular. So her name is Cindy Roberson. She's a community member, and she was a community member and would say that didn't ever see herself as an activist, but rather this role chose her. She was living in Cherokee County, North Carolina, which is right along the beautiful Blue Ridge Mountains. This was supposed to be her dream home. She wanted to escape the city life and have peace and quiet. And then all of a sudden, a data center appeared just miles away from her home. And she basically heard a blaring, high-pitched noise for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and it obviously drove her insane. Just to give you some context, I have some clips here of what that sound kind of sounds like. So this is a news report just a couple of days ago in South Jersey on just some residents who have been experiencing issues with the data center noise.
Do you hear that? It's a humming noise that is rattling neighbors in South Jersey. They tell NBC 10 that sound is making them unable to sleep, and they think they know where it is coming from. A data center is being built nearby. NBC 10's Siobhan McGurl has more on their concerns and the company's response from Vineland.
Right here, the gray house, the data center is right down the street.
Teresa Lewis says a loud noise that she thinks is coming from this data center being built in Vineland is keeping her up at night. She says it sounds like an airplane.
Flying low, but it's consistent, it just doesn't stop.
And she's not the only one who's heard it.
It sounds like an industrial hum, like a vibration.
Michael Gentile says he's reported the noise to the county's health department. So is Scott Montgomery.
You can't sleep. You can't fall asleep right away. It wakes you up.
The data center is not far from his home. He shared this video with us that he took from his back deck. You can hear a hum.
We like to, sleep or be here with windows open because it got nice out. I mean, it was a brutal winter. And you could just hear it pulsating through the house.
The people we met say the noise fluctuates and is worse at certain times compared to others, especially bothersome at night. They are convinced it is coming from the data center site.
It's deafening and it's disturbing.
Living in the area for years, they say they didn't used to hear the hum.
We did reach out to the county, hoping to learn more about those noise complaints, along with any information on what the health department found, but we've not heard back yet. Data One, owner of the data center, did get back to us.
They said in a statement, "We appreciate the support of city leaders and the patience of the Vineland community during the temporary construction phase of our new data center. While this remains an active construction site, we understand concerns about ambient noise in the area. Based on recent inspections and acoustical monitoring conducted by the Cumberland County Health Department, our site is operating in full compliance with Vineland City noise ordinance limits. We take our role as a community partner seriously and will continue deploying sound reduction measures to minimize any impact on our neighbors." Siobhan McGurl, NBC 10 News.
So that's just an example of what the noise could sound like. And then I also wanted to include this clip as well, just about the water impacts. I don't know if folks may have seen this. I've seen this pop up on my Instagram Reels, if people still use that. But this is something that I thought was also impactful.
This is our cold water pressure in the kitchen. This is where I fill up water for storage. Those are the things we have to fill up to flush the toilets.
So you can see the sediment from the data center. Wow, and that's just from the water coming out of your faucet.
Yeah, and this is what's in all the pipes.
Just the well itself is probably 20,000, and that's not counting any of the
All the
faucets.
replacement of the fixtures and faucets,
That's
and
just-
toilets, and the lines that come underneath the house. It's overwhelming because you really feel like you are up against this huge
wall that you can't penetrate. There's nothing that.
So those are just two ways to just like really visualize and just like feel what community members are feeling for people who are living near these type of things. So this is something that Cindy was like right head on dealing with this issue in particular. So as you can imagine, the first thing she did was she wanted to just get this message out and see if everyone else was experiencing the same issue in her community. And not surprisingly, thousands of her neighbors that were out crying basically at the first town meeting around this particular data center. So they got organized. They started like a Facebook group. They got over 3,000 people in that community to sign a petition organized by her to call on the community to deal with the deafening noise that they were dealing. This was a 24/7 hour impact that they were dealing with. But kind of what Jessica was outlining was that the current county didn't necessarily have the zoning laws in place before this happened. So unfortunately, as much as they were organizing, unfortunately, the town didn't really respond well to the issue. So unfortunately, that community group wasn't able to be that successful around that effort. So actually, most of the residents in that area ended up leaving, including Cindy. Her story didn't end there. She ended up moving down to Gilmore County in Georgia, and she thought she was out of the woods. Another data center, another crypto mine, but she was able to catch it beforehand, which was the key of this story. And the way she said it was, I was ready this time. So she got up and worked, and she got over 1,000 people to join her Facebook page. And as a group, they had T-shirts, they got petition signatures, they had yard signs, they had routine group meetings, and they were able to turn out over 900 people to a key zoning hearing. And the way that she did that was she had different community members be able to recruit other people in the community. One of her highlights was she recruited a dentist. And basically what the dentist would do was just recruit people at his dental practice, giving out flyers to people. So there was just a lot of really cool community action happening. There was business leaders who were on board. They lined up over 60 speakers to testify. And they had a really clear strategy and ask to make sure that this particular crypto mine was going to be able to deal with the noise issue and then deal with the impacts around the electricity bills, et cetera. And they were successful. They ended up passing a moratorium on this particular crypto mine so that they were able to actually make sure they set particular standards around the crypto mine so it wasn't so loud and it wouldn't have impacts on the electricity demand. And coming out of that, they actually developed a model ordinance, kind of what Jessica did. And they basically now have around 14 or over 14 ordinances have been passed in Georgia using this particular model ordinance. What it would do is it did allow for the development of these crypto mines, but it actually just set standards for noise levels and appearance of the server farms they would have to meet before they could set up shop. So it was basically a proactive ordinance to be able to set up protections beforehand. So often in a lot of these community efforts, being able to catch it before it happens is usually the best way to also deal with these particular issues. Other ways this came up was also sometimes at the legislative level. I worked with a group in New Hampshire where they basically, there's these bills called right to mine bills. Basically, it's a legislative bill that would set up exemptions for particular facilities like a crypto mine or a data center to have exemptions to noise ordinances, which is obviously very problematic, and also setting up tax incentives to let them open up shop and incentivize opening up more of these. So basically, we had a community member pick that up and basically formed a coalition of groups in the New Hampshire area, and we helped them connect them with a statewide group that got them connected with communities across the state of New Hampshire, and they were able to get a bunch of testimony into the legislators, and they were able to block that bill on the past November, which was really exciting. But a key thing is to just keep an eye out for these type of bills showing up in a lot of legislators, and they're usually called these right to mine. We worked with a community in Tennessee where it was a very similar situation where a data center was opening up. A particular thing that actually got the community rallied around was not just the noise issue, but it was also particularly protecting a specific place. So protecting a iconic lake near their area was really important, and it was also an important flood zone. So in Tennessee, about a year ago, there was the big Hurricane Helene, so that was very top of mind. So the community group was stressing about the concerns with building this particular data center on the flood zone, given what the town went through previously. So they had a wide amount of people organized around the issue, and they were able to block that because of all of the public support they were able to generate. So we helped work with them, provide basically some helpful materials and yard sign designs and things like that to get more of the community out there. And then I also included, there was a data center proposed in Conshohocken, and there was this incredible community member who literally knocked on doors, including apartment buildings, to get the word out, and they were also able to block that project for now. But as we're seeing is that a lot of times when these data centers are coming in, there's a ton of people who have questions or concerned, and the biggest things are particularly the noise issue, the water, and I think second to the noise is the utility bills that people are concerned with. So I kind of want to echo what Jessica was saying, that in order to really make a difference on this issue is that we just all want to be more active in our local government. So that's something that I'm really passionate about, and why I do this type of work is that if more people are showing up to rooms, filling up the rooms, showing interest in these type of issues, and really just building support and winning folks, not just our own circles, but winning broad support on the issue with folks that we might not normally organize with, that's where we really make a difference and make headways of getting decision makers to open their ears and hear what are the concerns and make a difference on these issues. So like Jessica, we have resources on our website. We also have a partner. We also are doing trainings and summits around these type of environmental topics. So we're actually holding a summit in Southwest Pennsylvania. We have someone, Natalie, is going to be involved with that. But we're holding a summit particularly around this topic, helping training community members. There's a big hotspot happening in Southwest Pennsylvania where these are popping up. So we're helping train community groups to arm them with tools to be able to advocate for themselves and be able to build a broad grassroots movement. So overall, it's just really about winning hearts and minds, getting people to realize hey, this issue is really about transparency. People just want to know when these things are coming in, how much water are they going to use, how much electricity are they going to use, what's going to be the effect on my electricity bill, what's going to be the effect on my public health, or things like that. So we want to make sure that this is a transparent process where the community is involved and active in it. So it's kind of like a two-way street. So we just got to be there, got to show up, but also arm ourselves with all the resources so that we can continue to educate ourselves, get more people involved on this issue. So that's about that. A lot of the stats I referenced was from a report by one of our sister organizations called the Frontier Group. So it's called the Big Data Centers, Big Problems Report. So I encourage folks to go on Google, use Google to look it up. That's a good resource to give some talking points, some information about the electricity use. And then if you are wanting to start a community effort, you can reach out to me at my email at max@communityactionworks.org. And that's all I have. Thanks.
You guys want to come sit up here? So we're going to open it up for a Q&A. If you're in the front, I'll try to hand the microphone to you. And if you're in the back, I'll repeat the question so that it can be on the recording. And yeah, let's open it up. Anybody have questions? Here. The question is, can we stop this data center from coming in, or has it been approved?
Are you talking about the one in Falls Township? So that is being built. Like, construction has already begun, and that there's some pieces of the permitting process that still remain, but that is being built in a part of Falls Township that is zoned for heavy industrial. It's a former steel mill site. There's a whole sort of industrial complex in addition to the data center that's kind of being redeveloped there. So that project is going forward. It met the by right zoning, is my understanding, for that area. They'll need a variety of permits from the state and from the local government. One thing that is when you build a power plant along with a data center, you're going to need an air permit for that under the State Air Pollution Control Act. A lot of times that's where my organization, that's where I get involved, because if we believe that your power plant application doesn't meet the requirements of the Air Pollution Control Act or otherwise contributes to a violation of Pennsylvania law, that's where you might have some grounds to appeal, to litigate, to file a lawsuit basically against that piece of the permit for the power plant part. But and I don't know of any action. I don't know the status of that air permit or whether there's any sort of claims to be made there, but I think that data center is going in. And so then I think that the question is, okay, it was, for that township, the question is like, it was permitted by right. What are the other conditions on it, right? Like, just because something can be built and the noise ordinance or whatever it is at that time, somebody still got to enforce that, right? And a lot of times that, in my experience, is going to rely on citizens to say, I think they're violating their noise ordinance, right? Who are you going to work with? How are you going to collect that data? How are you going to encourage enforcement? Because the municipality still has laws on the books that need to be enforced. Sometimes that's really hard, right? Like, I empathize with local governments. Like, a noise ordinance is hard to enforce. And yet, right, if that's how one of your rules to protect your community, that's what you have to do. So I think, the challenge for everybody else is to say, okay, well, let's look at the laws on our books now, right? So that we can, but that data center is definitely going forward.
Okay, and just behind you? So the point was that the at the state level, they have actually given tax incentives to build these data centers, and that's why we have this problem.
Yeah, it says, as of early 2026, the tax breaks have made Pennsylvania a competitive hub for large-scale data centers.
Yeah, tax breaks have made Pennsylvania a large-scale hub for data centers.
Yeah, and I can add on a little bit to that because that's absolutely true. And I also think there's some opportunities for advocacy here. Pennsylvania, I forget exactly when, enacted a sales tax exemption for data centers for the stuff, the computer hardware, the wires, the stuff that's going into the data center. They don't have to pay sales tax on any of that. I think that's a bad idea, unsurprisingly, right? I don't think that Amazon and Google and Meta need handouts on the taxes that they would pay the state for their computers, right? There are some legislators who are considering limiting or repealing that tax exemption. If that's an issue that speaks to you, I definitely recommend you contact your state legislators about that, because there is some action on that. There are folks who are rethinking whether we should be giving, as a state, that kind of tax handout to those types of entities. Also, at the local level, sometimes localities have sort of economic opportunity zones, or they're interested in giving particular forms of development, like a 10-year tax abatement or something like that. That's something you can also think of. That's something that you can control. That in your locality you can control. Are we going to give somebody a property tax exemption to build a data center, or are we not? Right? And so as you're reevaluating your incentives, that's something you can think about. You can also think about conditioning that, right? If you want to get a tax exemption, you have to build clean energy. If you want to get a tax exemption, you have to be LEED certified. And we see municipalities around the state thinking about these sort of things. Okay, we don't want to be, and I think as a municipal decision maker, it's really challenging. You don't want to be necessarily anti-development. Maybe your community needs those construction jobs. Maybe you have a facility that you think, well, this is a brownfield, like this is maybe not a bad idea, but you can put some conditions on it. You can create some incentives to have it be the kind of development that your community is interested in. I think LEED building or some other kind of like environmental certification for a building is one really positive aspect. We're seeing a lot of interest at the state and at the community level in requiring clean generation and thinking about how can you encourage, how can you incentivize clean generation for the power required for this thing.
Amazing. Here in the front. Here.
Yeah, it's all good.
What do the states and the municipalities get in return for giving tax breaks to bring these data centers into their area?
So what are the incentives that the states get from bringing data centers to the area? 25 jobs.
Yeah.
That's what we're selling out for.
I mean, I think people can have different political viewpoints on this. I don't want to give like a flip answer, right? But, in general, when the state puts on an incentive for some kind of development, it believes that it's going to get some kind of back-end benefit in terms of jobs, in terms of later tax revenue, in terms of attracting other development to the Commonwealth. At my organization, we spend a lot of time thinking about sustainable development and what does that look like, right? We have a long history in Pennsylvania of extractive resource development that works for communities for a while and then is a boom and bust cycle that leaves them bereft, that leaves them without jobs, without an industry, without opportunities for their children. So I think this is an occasion where our state decision makers should be asking exactly that question that you just asked. What are we getting in return for this development? Is it worth it? I don't think we've shown yet that it's worth it, but that doesn't mean that I don't think that means like, okay, don't do it, right? It means think strategically about it.
Yeah. And then to add on, like another avenue is like, maybe not being able to stop the development itself, but then really just kind of bringing it back to holding these data center accountable. So like there's definitely opportunities, with local townships to, put limits on noise. There's definitely advocacy opportunities at the local level. And
Max,
then
can you talk about the jobs piece too? Because you mentioned, there was a statistic you mentioned in your presentation about how the jobs are not permanent.
Yeah, they're not necessarily. Yeah, I mean, there's some reports around that, but I do think that, like, I think in terms of like what I think will actually move people forward are more of just like what are the actual like impacts on like everyday people, and like that's what's worth it, and that's what we should invest in and our time and what. So thinking more about like where can we make change to limit the impacts on like community members. So thinking through like why, like instead of powering it through a dirty diesel, using a cleaner energy to power these things. Or other ideas would be putting transparency laws. They need to report how much water they're using, how much electricity they're using.
Yeah, Dominique. Do you have any information about green data centers?
So I haven't heard that. I don't think that specific. I haven't heard that specific term used a lot, but my sense would be that a green data center would be one that uses renewable or clean energy to power it. I don't think we see that a lot yet, and the reason why is that data centers right now are trying to build out, and they're looking for like speed to power. They want to connect to the grid, because that's their most reliable source of power. When you flip the switch, the lights go on. A data center is selling a service to its clients, right? If I own a data center and I'm selling space to Netflix needs to be able to operate 24/7, right? Whenever somebody wants to turn it on, they need to be able to work, right? I need to be able to Google something 24/7. So they want to be constantly on, and for that, they want the grid. Now, they probably want backup power. They might want other behind-the-meter generation, so they're not always using the grid, but they want to be connected to our grid. And our grid in Pennsylvania is not green. I'm trying my hardest every day to green it. But our grid in Pennsylvania is largely a fracked gas grid. We get a lot of our power from fracked gas. We only have 4% renewable sources in Pennsylvania. So we are not yet seeing anyone operating solely on green power. I believe it's Microsoft that has entered into the power purchase agreement with 3 Mile Island. So their plan there is to use 3 Mile Island's nuclear capability to produce power for their data center. Nuclear can run 24/7 as its primary source of power. That data center will also be connected to the grid, right? Like the idea that you're going to have solely behind the meter, unconnected to the grid. I think there's a lot of conversation about that, and I think like a dive into what these facilities are really going to end up doing is that they're also so part of that challenge, of course, is greening our grid, right? And that's a much bigger picture than what we're talking about right now.
Anyone else? Here, the fourth row. Mm-hmm. So the question is, are they building an adjacent power system for the Falls Township data center?
It's the old U.S. Steel power.
Yeah. They don't have to build a fresh new power plant there because they're already going to tap into one, is my understanding. We do see other proposals around the state where they're building like essentially a small or a big power plant. You might have heard talk about the Homer City one out in the western part of the state. That's a site that housed a coal plant until a couple years ago when the coal plant closed. They want to build a huge power plant there, some of which will go direct to the data center, some of which allegedly will go to the grid. In Bradford County, they're building a less than 300 megawatt power plant just to power the data center. And we're seeing more of those, right? And in part, I think that's because these data centers want to say that they can come online fast, so they think if they build a smallish frac gas power plant, that they will be able to come online more quickly. I don't actually believe that that's reflective of reality. The timeline to build a power plant is not as fast as one might think, or as one might want to tell one's investors that it is. So I think that another problem here, it's sort of like generically, is that it's not like we're at the beginning of this industry, but we're early enough that there's a lot of talk about things that may or may not ever actually be built, both good and in a good way and in a bad way, right? We're familiar with the idea of calling something a bubble. I do believe that this is a bubble, but I don't know at what point the bubble bursts. And I certainly don't want it to be after we build a whole bunch more frac gas power plants. So that's really one of my big concerns, is being realistic and holding data centers to sort of realistic plans. What are you actually going to do before ratepayers across the PJM service area get stuck paying for transmission that isn't needed? And I can talk about that all day, so I'll back up on that for a minute.
All right, a couple more questions, and then we'll wrap. How about in the back?
Yeah, at one time, Waste Management had a 300 megawatt methane-powered power plant. They shut it down. Is that one of the possible alternatives?
So the question is that Waste Management had a power plant, and they shut it down. Is that an alternative for these data centers? For powering the data? How much power do they need?
It really depends. I mean, that facility that I referenced in Bradford County is building a 248 megawatt power plant to power its data center. So I think it really depends. I think.
How big is that, by the way?
So if you think about like it's like a small power plant. A large power plant could be anywhere from like 1 gigawatt, 1,000 megawatts to a bigger power plant of 2 megawatts. Like if the frac gas power plant proposals I've seen to just power the grid are in the neighborhood of like 900 megawatts to 2 gigawatts to 2,000 megawatts. So under 300 is small, and there's a lot of variation here. There's a lot of variation in data centers in terms of how much power they need, right? If Meta or Amazon or Google wants to build something, it's going to be large, right? But there are other market players here that aren't just those big companies, other tech companies.
How about here in the? Yeah, I think she's sort of talked about renewable options, but currently the Pennsylvania grid is not green. And there are no are there current incentives to greenify the grid here?
So there are some legislative proposals to require data centers to give incentives to add renewable energy. You know, overall, we as people need to green our grid. Unfortunately, we have not seen a lot of legislative support in Pennsylvania or nationally for that. I spent the last 5 years of my life trying to litigate about RGGI, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, which would have helped provide Pennsylvania with dollars to green our grid, and the legislature decided not to do that. So, like, I feel your frustration, and I think we all need to be talking to our legislators and looking for ways to incentivize and to require, more than just incentivize, but to require the greening of our grid. And that is a much bigger question than just data centers.
And to add on to that, I think this is an opportunity here at the local level too for something we should be advocating for. Because often when we think about statewide or federal legislation, we need data points, or we need basically a model to basically, you know, what could we model for other things like that. So the more we can do things at the local level, which I think we have much more leverage, which is why I think there's a huge opportunity. Like, yes, this sounds like a dark picture of where things are at. I mean, it's
dark for a Saturday morning.
It's dark for a Saturday morning, but I'm very optimistic.
Well, we just need to hold them accountable.
Yeah, exactly.
Because they have the money to be able to develop this stuff. So, and
Yeah,
one
exactly.
more, just follow up.
So do we have a list of people to contact? Because everyone's going to go home, they're going to talk about this, they're going to think about this, but then there's no action after.
And can we volunteer for whatever you need us to do?
Absolutely. That is it.
Yeah.
Call to action. I think we could probably come up with that. Did everybody left their email addresses so we can do okay. Leave your email addresses if you're interested in receiving a follow-up email, and we'll coordinate with you.
Yeah, we'll definitely follow up.
Yeah, and just started to give like an independent plug. Like, if you sign up, if you become a member of Penn Future, you know, sign up on our website, pennfuture.org. We regularly do action alerts with language that will send you, you know, at the state level to your particular legislator, or to the particular office of DEP, the Department of Environmental Protection, that's considering something. So, you know, we do this all the time. We'll say, you know, contact the Senate's voting on X. Here's how we suggest, you know, your senators vote on X. Here's an email you can send, fill out the form, you know, really facilitating that. So not to spam everyone or to suggest adding to your email burden, but I think I think that's a good way on this, and we're very active on this issue.
Both of these organizations are doing incredible work on this.
Yeah, and I'd be happy to follow up with anyone here who wants to do any sort of organizing.
Okay, couple more. This here in the.
I just want to point context. 1,000 megawatts, which is like about the size of a facility, that's been enough power for like 500,000 homes.
Okay,
Right.
so say that. Sorry, I want you to say that into the microphone.
1,000 megawatts?
1,000 megawatts is enough to power about 500,000 homes. The one in Falls Township is about 600 megawatts, and there's a ton of solar in the PJM interconnection queue, but it just takes years to build. So we sit on top of frack gas, like she said. We have a lot of nuclear facility. We are a cheap area, but it's hard to build solar, and we don't have a lot of wind resources here either.
Yeah. Okay. One more question. Here, I've seen your hand a couple times. Right here, in the hat.
The water pollution and the noise pollution.
Here, I'm going to give you the microphone.
Problems that can really be mitigated, can they be solved given time and money, or is it the nature of the beast? And you can't really, aside from not building the data center.
I think there are definitely ways to mitigate at least the noise pollution, like like different cooling methods for sure. And then I think for water, like more encouraging them to do closed loop systems and actually doing closed loop systems as a way to conserve their water. Those are potential ways that, you know, they could mitigate it, but obviously there needs to be more pressure.
I mean, this is a technology that's grown in leaps and bounds every day. So I think the concept that like these are just costs of doing business that can't be fixed I can't say that, right? Like, I can't believe that we're up here talking about data centers that take as much power as could power 5 million homes. You know, I mean, I do believe that there are technical solutions, and I also believe that the history of environmental regulation in this country shows that when you put a rule on, industry figures out how to follow it, and they figure out how to evolve their technology to fit it. We know that there are different ways of cooling data centers. We know that that is constantly evolving, and that technology has changed since the first data centers were built. Some of those require less water but more power. I think that is a set of trade-offs that we will see industry try to figure out. So I don't think these are unsolvable problems.
And just like the last statement here is that as this issue has been evolving for the past few years, the public has been outspoken more and more. I think we're actually seeing this more and more just like in our feeds and just in our everyday lives. And I think the fact that more people are stepping up, that's sending market signals to the industry and to decision makers that this is something that we need to actually have a honest conversation. So I think, yes, there's a lot of concerns, a lot of impacts, but the very fact that this room right now is full, I can tell you that there are town halls across the country around this issue. Rooms are full because people are absolutely more and more concerned. That's a really good sign that people are waking up to the issue, and I think that's going to lead a path forward on all of these concerns moving forward. So the more that we speak up, the more we organize and are more active in these conversations, that's what's going to make us more likely to be able to move forward on issues to get industry to innovate and make things better for people.
Great point. Yeah. Dominique, I know I saw your hand go up a couple times. Just one last thing. Could there be a moratorium on the building of data centers?
I'm going to jump in here with the legal answer. A municipality cannot ban a land use, and I don't believe a municipality, as a matter of law, can enact a moratorium. There are folks at the state level considering a call for a statewide moratorium, and I think we will see more on that next week. I do believe that would be legal for the state to enact a moratorium, but your town can't. At risk of being sued at risk of a lawsuit, because I don't believe that localities have the authority under Pennsylvania law to ban or impose a temporary ban, which is what a moratorium is on land use. But the state, I believe, could enact legislatively through the General Assembly signed by the governor a moratorium on this type of development.
So call your state level representatives. I guess if we're going to wrap it up now, if you guys have any other questions, I think they'll stick around for a few more minutes. Sure.
Go for it.
That then affects the ability to take care of emergency situations, like they can't put fires out in other places. And that's another thing that should be brought up.
Yeah, it's a great point. She's making the point that water usage actually limits the abilities for even fire departments to put out fires. So it's a great point. Thank you guys so much for coming. This was really wonderful. Thank you to our speakers. And again, sign up for the email list, and we'll send some follow-up call to actions after this lecture.
Awesome.
That was great.
I didn't think that we would fill this room today, but we did, and it just goes to show what people are thinking about this whole topic right now. Thanks again for coming, and enjoy the rest of your day.